we begin, I have a few announcements to share, please. For a smooth session, we ask that you please mute your microphones and turn off videos unless otherwise directed. When you are speaking, you will see that those speaking will turn on the video, and we hope that you can know and start meeting some of the colleagues that join these webinars. We will be also monitoring the chat window, so please feel free to add your thoughts and comments and questions throughout the presentations. You can also use the chat window to introduce yourself to the other participants in the webinar. We will also be recording the session. So after we finish, our colleagues from IT in Bangkok office of the ILO will prepare this link, and we will be able to send it around and can be shared with other stakeholders. During the second half of the meeting, we will be doing a breakout sessions. This works very similar to when we are in a meeting and we go to a different room in a small group to discuss. We will do this virtually, and when we get to that session, we will give further instructions so that you know how this is going to be happening. My colleague Laura, you saw me talking with her before. She has the superpowers to manage the virtual rooms. So she is going to be helping the webinar run smoothly, and she can also interrupt at any time to give instructions to me as moderator. Thank you very, very much, Laurel, for being there with us. Now, in terms to agenda and getting into our business right away, Laurel is posting the agenda in the chat box, so you can follow that there. But first, we will have a presentation very short by Ms. Johnny Simpson. She is the Senior Specialist Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination of the Decent Work Technical Team for East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. And she works with me in the Bangkok office. And for those that don't know me or are new to these webinars, you know that I'm Cristina Martinez, the Senior Specialist for Environment and Decent Work of the Decent Work Technical Team at the Regional Office for Asia Pacific, the office in Bangkok. After we hear from Johnny, we will also hear from Dr. Samantha Sharp. She's a research director at the Institute for Sustainable Futures, ISF, at the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, and a partner in this project, implementation partner. Then we will start the virtual breakout session, where we will be looking for your inputs in particular. Finally, at the end of the breakout sessions, we will be back at the plenary room, and a rapporteur from each group will provide a 2-minute summary of key points to the plenary. All of this should happen in 1 hour. And we are already a few minutes inside. So let's see how we go, and I look forward for all your deliberations. I welcome now Johnny Simpson and Samantha Sharp for the presentation. Johnny, you have the floor, and as you know, I'm going to turn off my video, but I will be putting that back when you are 1 minute for Samantha to finish the presentation. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, very good. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. Very excited to be here today with you and have this opportunity to exchange with you. We thank you all for being there. This is a conversation with you. So our presentations, you will find, will be quite short. To kick things off, we wanted to give a reminder of of how things were pre-COVID and post-COVID in terms of gender equality. And one of the main messages here is that things are the same, except worse. So we can see pre-COVID concentration of women in low-skilled jobs and sectors, and confined to the tasks, a very small number of tasks, usually those at the bottom of the pyramid, with low pay, lower skills, and more precarious contract situations. So unfortunately, this means that in the COVID situation, women may be the first to lose their incomes. And if we think of the some 43 million workers in the garment sector across this region, the majority of those are women. So there will be a disproportionate effect there. We need to hear that pre-existing inequalities will be widened if we don't take action in the post-COVID. So things like the unequal share of unpaid care. We're hearing a lot about this having been exacerbated with COVID-19. Now there are additional burdens of unpaid care where women take up already in our data at ILO, women take up 4 times as much unpaid care as men across the region, and this is higher than the global data. Now, the additional burdens of homeschooling, childcare, caring for sick family members, this may have some very difficult repercussions down the road, and we'll talk about that next slide. Low representation of women in leadership and in policy dialogue in the sector. This was already something that factored in, but we are watching the new policies being sent out and the task forces being put forward, and we are seeing that women's representation and gender sensitivity are lacking in social dialogue and the policy responses for the most part. And the last element there is the high levels of violence and harassment, in particular gender-based violence. And as many of you know, ILO adopted this year a new convention on eliminating violence and harassment in the world of work. In recognition, the stakeholders of the ILO, workers and employers and government, all agreed to adopt this convention, recognizing how important an issue it is for us all as workers, as employers, and that we all have a stake in this. Well, and as we can see right now in COVID times, that gender-based violence and domestic violence are on the increase with confinement. More stress is happening among families and workers and households, both for employers who are faced with detrimental economic impacts on their businesses, but also for workers who are confined at home, who may not have an income right now. And for this purpose, workplace is now for many also home. And so this is even further exacerbated in the COVID time. Now we've gone towards putting a slide together here, bringing forward some of the thoughts on what the impact will be in terms of short, medium, and long term if things continue as they go. And as I mentioned, the main message is that if we don't take action, there will be further inequalities. So we can say for the short term, immediate loss of income and its ripple effect on the ability of families to meet their basic needs, increase in unpaid care work, increase in gender-based violence. Workers will be exposed to risks of infection in the world of work, both within and beyond the physical workplace, and women will likely be directly and indirectly discriminated against when it comes to retrenchment, just due to the big numbers, but also things like unpaid care duties, which means they may have to come back a little bit later to the workplace, for example. In the medium term, we're talking about deepening economic crisis, which may lead to prolonged poverty and prevent opportunities for effective social dialogue. We'll have a lack of access to financial inclusion, which may prevent workers, particularly women, migrant women workers from rural communities, for example, from accessing social protection schemes. Workers, especially women workers, may be in more precarious working conditions than before, with higher risks of labor violations. And women workers are susceptible to experience adverse health outcomes, including reduced access to sexual and reproductive health services. And for the long-term, prolonged period of unemployment and poverty, particularly for women, is a possible risk. Longer-term unemployment of women garment workers could adversely affect their economic and social empowerment. And we have trends of nearshoring and automation that may accelerate this. And we also have intergenerational impacts on the health and education for children, and in particular girls. So these are some of the impacts that we're thinking about moving ahead, and we need to take some actions. And why? So why is it so important to do so? So as new plans to restructure the sector are being made, gender equality and sensitivity are largely absent in the current policy discussions, and women's representation in these discussions is weak. So failing to consider the gendered impacts of this crisis will slow the return of the sector, because in order to remain competitive, the sector and employers need to be responsive to the changing realities of their workforce. As a result, unless intentional actions are taken, COVID-19 risks to widen the pre-existing inequalities, and previous important gains from the garment sector on poverty reduction and gender equality may be lost. The crisis has presented the industry with a rare opportunity to redesign itself in a way that includes decent work, gender equality, and environmental sustainability towards competitiveness. Accordingly, it's crucial then that governments, businesses, and other stakeholders understand the multidimensional impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on women and men workers, and design those policies that will enable a smart, efficient, and gender-responsive recovery. And we'd like to see that we build back a better normal. Addressing both the new as well as the pre-existing gender challenges will lead to a stronger, more competitive and resilient sector in the long run. But this won't happen on its own, and it's going to require intentionality with collaboration and partnerships, stakeholder actions and champions, as well as strategies. So this is why we're here to discuss with you. Now I'd like to hand back to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johnny, for these clear points. Let's go directly right away to Samantha to bring in the environmental component. Samantha, please, the floor is yours.
We cannot hear you, Samantha. Are you muted?
Yes, I think can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Christina, and thank you, Joni, for your presentation, and thank you, everyone, for making the time to join us today for this discussion. So I'm going to briefly just talk about how COVID-19 is impacting environmental sustainability in the sector. So as Joni talked about, the impacts of COVID-19 have been immense and immensely negative. Loss of lives, loss of employment, loss of livelihoods, economic ramifications that will really be with us for years to come. However, in terms of environmental impacts, well, perversely, these have mitigated. As the various parts of the sector have slowed and shut down, manufacturing has slowed and stopped, and so too have the environmental impacts from these manufacturing activities. So I think we've all seen the before and after photographs of satellite images showing reduced air pollution and reduced river pollution. So COVID-19 has actually given us a brief look at what enhanced environmental sustainability could look like. Environmental sustainability has been a priority issue for the garment sector for a number of years now, and there are many initiatives, global agreements, national and local movements towards cleaner production. But by and large, these have not been enough to counter the rapidly expanding and environmentally damaging impacts of the sector. And just on the slide here, it lists off some of those main impacts. So obviously the garment sector is one of the most globalized sectors in the world, and it's inherently linked with economic and employment development in many countries. But it is also one of the most polluting. So there's various accounts of the carbon emissions from the sector accounting for 5 to 10% of global emissions. The sector is extremely water intensive, and this comes right through from raw fibre production, largely cotton, but also the water intensive activities associated with textile manufacturing. And going forward under climate change scenarios, we see an alignment between the major production centres of textiles, largely across Asia and Africa, also coinciding with areas of high water security issues. So intensity of water use and water security is an issue now and will only increase in severity into the future. The sector also produces large volumes of wastewater, so much of which is unfortunately discharged inappropriately into rivers and waterways. So estimates again that textile manufacturing accounts for about 20% of global water pollution. Textile manufacturing also requires the use of many chemicals, and these too find their ways into waterways, discharged with the wastewater, and some of these chemicals are hazardous. Hazardous when they come into contact with ecosystem, and also hazardous when they or toxic in the environment when they're mixed with other substances. And another issue is textile waste, and so this is both pre and post-consumption waste from phases. So in pre-consumption waste is mainly from garment assembly, and also an emerging issue is around microplastics. And again, these come in pre and post-consumption. And in pre-consumption, microplastics happen through the washing around textile manufacturing, obviously of synthetics, and garment assembly and the final wash associated with garment assembly. Sometimes up to half of the microplastics released in a garment's lifetime can come from those two periods. Okay, sorry, Joni, could I just have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, as Joni also mentioned, in the post-COVID period, going back to business as usual is not going to be likely, and that we really have an opportunity to reshape how the sector will look and address some of these fundamental sustainability issues, so both on the social sustainability but also on the environmental sustainability side. For environmental sustainability, during the COVID crisis, there's really been diverging views from stakeholders. On one hand, there are some stakeholders that are looking to delay some commitments to investments in sustainable processes, equipment, sustainable material sourcing, and just focus on recovery. And others, however, are focusing on what the new normal looks like. And that coming out of the pandemic will have, particularly consumers are going to have a stronger focus on sustainability and transparency. And brands, as a result, are looking at demand-driven production as a way for the sector to develop a pathway to circular economy and slowing and closing production cycles. So amongst all these debates, there's really a further question, what is the role for Asia in this new normal? If brands in the West are thinking of demand-focused business models, which can essentially localized or nearshore production as a way to intensify a relationship with consumers, also by offering repair or secondhand sales, in combination with other elements of business models, such as implementing mass customization, reducing inventory, or reducing the discounting culture, what role will Asia still play the same role in the sector? And at the same time, consumer markets and brands are growing in Asia. How are they going to approach the opportunity of the circular economy? So there's definitely a lot of uncertainty and unknowns in how the sector will transition to this new norm, and it's a really good opportunity to, like we're having today, for these conversations about the future direction of the sector. And this is just a final slide, and it's part of, I guess, some early thinking that we've been doing about putting together a paper, and with obviously feedback on this today about what some of the immediate opportunities for enhancing environmental sustainability are. And so in terms of immediate opportunities, investments in water and sanitation services in factories, because these help to the health and well-being and mitigation of COVID, being able to have hand washing and proper sanitation within a workplace. But WASH can also be the first step to further investments around water efficiency and wastewater treatment. We're going to have a big issue with overstock and textile waste. The long lead times of the sector and the prolonged nature of the shutdown, cancelled orders, there's going to be significant inventory no longer needed. So how do we deal with that sustainably? A common theme across all the commentary about how the sector will change is the importance of collaboration. So no company or brand will be able to come through the crisis alone. They'll need collaboration. They need to share information with suppliers, subcontractors about solutions. So we need to think about how to build capacity for collaboration, given that the crisis has also highlighted the power inequalities in the sector. Social dialogue processes offer a way forward. And finally, when we think about collaboration and dialogue and planning for recovery, we also need to think about who we include in those conversations. So do all stakeholders have equal access and chance to contribute? As Joni has highlighted in the gender lens is not there at the moment. There's also other stakeholders, smaller businesses or businesses further down the production system that also don't have equal access to participate. And so there's just a few things to think about and hopefully discuss in the later session. Thank you.
Joni and Samantha, the points I think that are clear and loud. We need actually to have the points clearly stated for a conversation where we can increase the integration of gender and environment in the recovery packages. And as Samantha mentioned very well a moment ago, how are we building capacity for collaboration? And how are we building this capacity also including small producers and SMEs that are very much in need. So allow me now to, dear participants, to do that. We are going to go into the breakout rooms, the virtual breakout rooms. So soon you will see a notice requesting you join a breakout room for the discussion on the questions that you can see now in your screen. Please select yes for both requests, and during that time we encourage everybody to participate in the discussion as you feel comfortable. These are informal discussions, but very important that you have your voice represented in the conversation.
There were a few questions that Dawn and David raised, which was around how do you shorten the supply chain and bring work closer to home? Has there been any discussion or any analysis on that? And also David asked whether there has been any understanding of how women workers are engaged in the process of social dialogue with the industries and their response to COVID-19. I hope I'm not missing out on anything. Joni and other members, if I have, please add to it.
So much for these discussion points have very interesting comments. Perhaps Johnny might like to add anything after. But let's now listen to the key points from the environment group. Please, the rapporteur, could you introduce yourself and share with us the point? Thank you. Is the rapporteur ready? Karina?
She's having troubles unmuting.
Oh, Laurel, with your superpower, can you unmute Karina? Karina Caglio, I think.
Great. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, Karina. Please introduce
Okay.
yourself.
Yeah, I'm Karina Caglio from UTS, Institute of Sustainable Futures. And I was, happy to be in the environment room. There were many opportunities and challenges that were raised. So one was, of course, this increased dialogue is possible. However, the challenge to that is because of the competition in the industry that is being perpetuated because of the COVID crisis and the great debt that is being brought forward, that it could be more difficult to get into more collaborative spaces. And another part of that was that with the business models as they stand, there's an opportunity there in terms of payment terms that could be shifted because of this change that's happened with COVID, and it's made it glaringly visible the detrimental effects of these terms of payments that are in the industry, and really putting a lot of pressure on the suppliers at the moment. Water was one area which we saw as a, Katerina brought up, that was a thread that could be seen as a piece that could link gender and environment very deeply at this time, with the increased sanitation in factories and in some cases the only place that women have access to good sanitation in terms of flowing water, and creating safer places for women to use these facilities. There's a huge opportunity there as well to increase water and sanitation facilities within the factory settings. There is also a conversation that was brought up by Kyoko about the adverse effects of job loss that will happen, and also in conjunction with that, the factories having to set up in different ways to have more space between the workers, which will mean that less workers will be needed in the factories, or possibly. And so with that, there's the need for transitions for the factory workers into other sectors or into other areas, as the jobs may not return within our sector. There were other comments at the end, but unfortunately my sound was quite poor. So if others in the group could please wrap those or summarize those for us, that would be great. Sorry that I couldn't finish the whole group's discussion.
Thank you so much, Karina. Could I please call on Renee, if you are there, to maybe to provide some of the comments, or Samantha? Thanks. I think Renee might not be with us. Samantha, do you want to add any more comments in relation to the environment group?
I'm there, but I was muted. So the mute button changed to one place. So that's there. No, I think that really the issue on the economics is very tight, and the impact on how much people can work in the same spaces will be very much a challenge as we move forward. And then I think the space and this, but at the same time I also mentioned, and that was maybe not covered, is that the focus on making it COVID safe will also lead to a more awareness of occupational health and safety. So maybe more for occupational health and safety in a broader sense, which would benefit, of course, workers and also the environment. So, but I think it's the sector is up for a very tough challenge to find a way out and to basically have to have some restructuring, and some firms will not be able to survive, whereas other firms might be able to weather the storm. Thank you.
Samantha, do you want to add any comment or to highlight any other issue, or anybody else from the group?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Samantha.
No, I think my two colleagues have covered pretty well everything. I would say the discussions around collaboration and how do you actually get that, both in a highly competitive, highly geographically dispersed supply chain, and how do you resource it? Because also, you know, essentially everyone is out of resources, out of money, and there's very little time to make that happen. So I guess, yeah, urgency and definitely challenging situation. But I guess consensus.
Thank you, Sam. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you.
I think. Thank you, Samantha. We have a few seconds after you speak. The sound didn't arrive. Johnny, from the gender comments, any issue that you would like to highlight, or any of the members of the group?
Well, simply to say that a lot of these ideas are extremely interesting. Each country context, of course, will have its own entry points. So we need to, of course, this was an initial conversation. We'll need to delve deeper into the country situation, and we'll be putting together a regional report looking at that exactly, and that's to feed into a regional action plan. So this particular conversation is a starting point that will feed into other activities happening under the project, and we certainly invite you to continue the engagement on this level and through the task forces or in direct contact with us. Really thanking everybody who was involved in the gender side in particular for their inputs during the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johnny. We are 3 minutes, I think, or 4 minutes over the time. So allow me to end this initial conversation here. The recording of the meeting will be shared as well as the key points. We will also share the presentation. And the next meeting of the Environmental Task Force will be on the 23rd of June for the participants of the Gender Environment Task Force. And the Gender Task Force will also meet that week. We will be sending details to both task forces and with an agenda and the points that we need to follow up from this conversation today. Before we go, Laurel is advising me that in the chat window, you will see a link for a short survey of the session. please do take a moment. It's not going to take more than, I think, 3 minutes to complete this survey after you hang up, and that will help us very much to build collaboration with the meaning and the impact that we want to build with you. I thank you very, very much to everybody that participated in the webinar, but also to those that are sending comments in the chat. We will be looking at the comments as well, and we will following up on the conversation. Thank you and have a good day. The beginning of the day in European time, rest of the day in Bangkok, and most of the countries in Asia, and end of the day in Sydney. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.